Greetings, fellow humans. I'm MartianBuu, and today we're going to talk about some more of the upcoming Showdown in the Badlands class cards. At this point, all of the cards have been revealed, so we have, instead of having like 90% of the context, we have 100% of the context. Today, I'm going to go through 3 remaining classes that have Highlander archetypes. So I'm particularly excited about these, especially Druid, but I think they all have a lot of like really exciting potential, even in Wild. So without further ado, let's talk about them. Here we have the Demon Hunter spells. So Fan the Hammer deals 6 damage randomly split amongst the lowest health enemies. This is an interesting board clear that can also kind of be damage. It reminds me a lot of Piercing Shot from Hunter. So you would pick the lowest health enemy, so you get to remove a small minion as well as deal as much damage as possible to face. The problem here is your opponent's board has to be pretty empty before this damage all goes face, right? So if your opponent has like a giant out, for example, as well as a mailbox dancer, and they're at 14 health, 2 of this is going to go into the mailbox dancer, and then the remaining is going to go into the giant, not doing enough damage to make any progress on the giant, and also not pressuring the face at all. Whereas Piercing Shot would have done 4 face. I do think that this is an interesting spell, especially in Standard, but I don't think it's going to be a big consideration for Wild. Then we have Pocket Sand, super fun flavor. So it's a Dark Bomb, 2 mana, deal 3 damage. Then it has Quick Draw. Your opponent's next card costs 1 more. So if you play this off the top, or if you discover it and play it that same turn, you get that added effect of ruining your opponent's curve. I think this is going to be a good card, especially because there's so many cards that discover Quick Draw. At least in Standard, we'll see if it finds a spot in Wild. It's decent burst with a nice upside, so there's a chance. Oasis Outlaws, 1 mana for Discover a Naga. If you've played a Naga while holding this, reduce its cost by 1. So this is meant to enable one of the minions we're going to see here in a second. Historically, Discover a card, reduce its cost by 1 tends to be pretty good. So if you have a Naga heavy deck, this will probably be pretty good. I think that this is going to be a really fun deck in Standard. I don't know if it has the support in Wild. Maybe at rotation when a lot of Sunken City moves to Wild, the deck will be something to think about if they keep printing support for the archetype in Standard the following year. Load the Chamber, 3 mana Fell spell, deal 2 damage. Your next Naga Fell spell and weapon cost 1 less. Now that says your next Naga Fell spell and weapon cost 1 less, not or. So again, this is to enable the card we're about to talk about, but you're getting 3 discount for this. You get to deal your measly 2 damage for 3 mana, which is terrible. But if you play all 3 of those card types, that was 2 damage for free, as well as the added synergy of being able to play all those cards with this minion. The fact that this is a Fell spell is obviously super relevant. There's a lot of like Fell spell tutor and Fell spell synergy in Demon Hunter. That will mean that this card synergizes with itself as well. So all the way over here on the right, this is the card that is the basis for this archetype. Blind Eye Sharpshooter. It's a 3 mana 1/5 Naga. After you play a Naga, deal 2 damage to a random enemy and draw a spell, and then you switch. So Naga spell lives on, except it's not a mana cheat card, it's a damage card, as well as a card advantage card. This is cool because it requires you to have discounted and played other cheap stuff to get a lot of value out of this card. It's like the reverse of Siren, where Siren gives you the mana to play a bunch of value. All of these like Naga things are part of the same package, so they'll all see play together in Wild, or none of them will, I think. All right, coming back over to the left, we have Midnight Wolf, 6 mana 6/6 beast with Rush. Outcast, summon a copy of this. So as long as this is on the left or right, this is a 6 mana 6/6. This is 2 6 mana 6/6 with Rush, which is really good. I expect this to see a lot of play in Standard. Is this good enough for Wild? So maybe because you can discount it with like Illidari Studies, you can get it out on 5. I'm not really expecting 6/6 bodies to do a lot of efficient work in an environment of heavy removal and giants, because 2 6/6 do not trade well into an 8/8. But this is a lot of stats for the mana, and it has Rush, so that's pretty good. I think if this was just Battlecry, not Outcast, I'd have a lot more faith in it, but because a lot of stuff has to align for this to be even active, I think it's kind of Wild fare. Then we have Parched Desperado, so 2 mana 3/2 Naga. If you've cast a spell while holding this, give your hero +3 attack this turn. So this is a Naga, it'll be good in the Naga deck, but it doesn't have to be about being a Naga. It could also just be a 2 mana 3/2 that gives your hero +3 attack this turn, and it doesn't have to be Outcast, and it's pretty efficient. So there could be some kind of funny Demon Hunter deck that tries to get out Bladed Lady or tries to do a bunch of lifesteal damage with the lifesteal weapon and Il'gynoth, this is good in all those things too. I don't think that this is going to make or break any of those archetypes, but I could see it being an important piece of some of them. It is also just damage, so maybe there ends up being a face Demon Hunter at some point, and this will be a good part of that. Then we have Bartendobot, 2 mana 3/1 mech, Battlecry, draw an outcast card and slide to the left side of your hand. You know, I understood that reference. But this is really cool. It's like the first card since, I don't remember its name. It's 0 mana. You discover a card in your hand to shuffle back into your deck, and then you get +3 attack that turn. It's the first card since that kind of allows you to manipulate your outcast cards, but it doesn't much more directly. You get to draw an outcast card, and unlike Double Jump, where it's nice that you draw the outcast card and it's active that turn, it stays active until you actually want to play it. So there's no pressure on you once you've drawn this card to play it right away, even if it's not quite ideal. You can leave it in the left side of your hand, ready to outcast whenever. I think that this is an important piece that Skull of Gul'dan has been missing. So you could build a deck that only has Skull of Gul'dan in it, and your intent is to play Bartendobot and put your skull on the left, where you can use it when you're ready, probably on curve, but this way you can discount higher cost things without risking having your skull in the middle of your hand in such a way that you will never be able to cast it where it will discount. It's also just a good card. Like, you can just play it in regular Demon Hunter to draw a card and activate your outcast. I think it's really interesting. It's really flexible. I'm looking forward to building stuff with it. Then we have the legendaries. So Snake Eyes is a 3 mana 2/3 Naga. Battlecry, roll 2 dice, then discover 2 cards of those costs. Doubles get an extra discover. So I think this is super cool. It's not like unbelievably random. It's like well within the realm of acceptable randomness in Hearthstone, I think anyways. The thing about it that I think is a little absurd is how much value you get out of this thing. So it is a 3 mana 2/3, so that's whatever stats, but getting to discover 2 cards is really good. The cost will be a little random, and a small portion of the time you'll get to discover a 3rd card, but this just seems like a really solid value card for every type of Demon Hunter. I imagine this will get played in literally every Demon Hunter deck in Standard while it's in Standard, and definitely a consideration for Wild. It is a Naga, so it's going to help out that Naga deck that they're working on for Standard. Then we have Gunslinger Kurtrus, a 5 mana 4/6 minion. Battlecry, if your deck has no duplicates, fire 6 random 2 damage shots at minions in the enemy's hand. So this is a brand new, very confusing effect just to read. So the way it works is the minions in your opponent's hand will take damage as if they had no effects. All right, so like if they had a Divine Shield, it doesn't pop the Divine Shield with the first shot, it just takes 2 damage. If they have an Acolyte of Pain in hand, they don't draw a card every time this damages it. I actually think that that makes it a little bit less interesting. It would just be cute if it activated effects like that, but it'd also make it a lot worse, right? So you want this card to be good, so it needs to not potentially benefit your opponent. It's also like incredibly complicated, and doing all that adds a lot of complication to it, so maybe it's better that your opponent's minions in hand have no effects. But then they have the damage, and if they go down to 0 health, they're destroyed. Not discarded, destroyed. The difference would be a discard effect is like Expired Merchant, and a destroy effect is like Immolation. So yeah, this is going to be the latest in the new way to do a Dirty Rat. I think that this is going to be absolutely devastating to have played against you, depending on what type of deck you are. This is 12 damage to minions in hand. If you only have a couple and they've got 6 health or less each, you've lost your only 2 minions and your 2 cards down in hand. If you play this against aggro, they lose their hand. So I don't know. We'll see how much we hate this being played against us, but I'm really excited to play it myself. Overall, I think that Demon Hunter got a lot of really cool stuff to work with. I'm super excited to play Demon Hunter in a way that I haven't been in a bit. It might end up being only a standard thing to do, but either way, I think that there's a lot of really cool stuff here. Spoiler alert, these are all going to be Highlander decks, but this is what I came up with for Demon Hunter. It's meant to be an aggressive good stuff pile. So we have all the quick damage and the cheap cards. I did include Immolation Aura because I think it's good against like Pirate Rogue and early even Shaman boards. But then I have Parched Desperado and Serenite Shambler in here as minions that are easily activated to give your hero plus attack to go with Bran. Bran can either go with our Gunslinger Kurtrus to delete our opponent's hand, or it can be a bunch of burst damage with our Serenite Shambler and Parched Desperado. I also included the Fellfire Deadeye synergy with expendable performers. So you have Kurtrus Demon Render hero up, and then you get your Fellfire out, and you get one of your token generators out, and suddenly you're doing a ton of face damage with Kurtrus. Where that might have some potential anti-synergy is the new Reno Lone Ranger card. Reno Lone Ranger is incredibly good, so it's a one-sided board clear that prevents your opponent from redeveloping after it happens. So you just get to wipe your opponent off the board, and then they only get to make one thing following that, and then it makes your hero power really busted, so it rotates between a bunch of effects that are all really good. So I have two thoughts on that. One is a deck like this might benefit from dropping the higher cost cards and leaning into Kurtrus and not having the Reno hero card at all. Like, that would be an aggro Highlander deck, and maybe that's better as not a Highlander deck. But regardless, it could be better to build this with a lower curve. But also, in the interest of including a bunch of like good stuff cards, like having a good stuff aggro deck, mid-range deck in Highlander, you either get out Kurtrus first, and that's great because you have Kurtrus out, and then like you play the Reno later and it's fine. Or the reverse of that, you play the Reno early on to get your one-sided board clear, and then later on you can play Kurtrus for burst. Or you play just one or the other of them in each game because this is a good stuff pile. It's meant to have a lot of cards that are really good on their own and win by whatever order you draw them in. So anyways, I have here, it's kind of like a mid-rangey aggro deck with a bunch of good packages in it. Stuff that's very flexible, stuff that's very good to play just on its own. We have the Snake Eyes in here just for some card advantage. The Carry Fell Soul Xylag combo, where Xylag is the only demon in the deck. And then Carria will be a discounted Xylag with increased stats. We have that in here. That got nerfed for standard, and it just hasn't had a deck yet. So I figure if we're trying to curve up as high as Reno Lone Ranger, it's a good spot to experiment with Carria Fell Soul Xylag again. Argus Emerald Star, again, we're just going up that high for the Reno anyway, so I figure the Titan ought to be worth trying out. We do have minions to work with to get Argus's various effects. So yeah, this seems really cool to me. I'm excited to play with it, and I'm excited to try out a lower curve version that doesn't go quite as high as Reno Lone Ranger. Next up, we have Druid, the class that I'm most excited to play with, as are many, I'm hearing. I'm a big fan of Reno Dragon Druid, as you guys know, who have been following the channel. That's a deck that I keep coming back to, and I think that these new cards support the style of Reno Dragon Druid that I like with Kazakusan, but we'll talk more about that later. First up for the spells, we have Rehydrate, so 2 mana nature spell, restore 7 health, and then if quick draw, you refresh 2 mana crystals. This is another in the list of cards that could go within an Auctioneer Druid. Auctioneer Druid is significantly worse than it was before the recent balance adjustments to those cards. But it is not gone because Togwaggle exists. So the Cold Tooth Mine consistency is gone. Auctioneer is more expensive, but it is still a deck that you run into sometimes. This could be good in a deck like that. You would play this, you would play Lifebinder's Gift, so you could like draw this and then use your Lifebinder's Gift to reduce your hand by 1, and then you're gaining mana crystals with this. It's also just kind of another 0 cost spell if you're playing it during your Auctioneer turn, so it's like a free draw. And it also flexes to be somewhat helpful if you're in an aggro matchup because it restores health. That's the biggest use case I can think of for this. Maybe what the real use case for this is like a Celestial Alignment deck, because this is going to cost 1 post alignment every time. So if you're like drawing through your deck a bunch, it gives you a bunch of mana and heals you. So having talked through that, I think it's much more likely to see play in Celestial Alignment, and I think it'll be a good piece of that. Then we have Dragon Tails. So 2 mana, choose 1, get 2 random dragons that cost 5 or less, or get 2 that cost 5 or more. So this is a lot like Dragon's Roar, which is something that kind of stopped playing in Dragon Warrior back when the slower versions of that were somewhat playable. And that's a pretty mid effect, right? This has a nice bonus of being able to get you cheap dragons if you play it early, or expensive dragons if you need it late. But the real benefit of this card is fusing the effects, right? So if you play the location or, you know, any type of Fandral effect that gets you both sides of this, maybe Embrace. Although if you're running Embrace, you're probably running Nourish, in which case you don't want to have any other choose ones. But this is a lot of raw value if you combine its effects, because you'll get the 2 cheap ones and the 2 expensive ones. Then we have Cactus Construct. So 1 mana nature spell, discover a 2-cost minion, summon a 1/2 copy of it. This is really interesting because it lets you discover the 2-cost minion. If you just got a random one, I would be out. But the fact that you get to pick from 3 and then get a 1/2 copy of it is really cool. Nature spells, there are a lot of nice aggro druid cards that want you to play nature spells, and this being a nature spell and being an aggro druid card really helps with that, I think. So if aggro druid, especially with the buffed adapt card, has any legs after expansion, I think that this will be a good card in that deck. Then we have Take to the Skies. So 3 mana, draw 2 dragons, give them +1/+1. Druid draw in a Reno Shell is actually pretty clunky. Combo druids don't have a lot of problem with draw, so they either have gone auctioneer and drawn their whole deck that way, or they play alignment and then all of their ultimate infestations and whatnot, draw them a ton for cheap. But the Reno decks tend to be a little awkward. So you have like Nourish or Life from Death, Composting, very conditional draw cards. But this one is both efficient and it tutors cards you want to have in hand. So a lot of dragon cards care about you holding dragons. So I think that this will be a pretty decent Reno Druid card. I also think that if you're running just there's a ramp dragon and there's a legendary dragon that can discount itself completely. If you're running like just those and Volcanic Drake, this could be really good for a non-Highlander dragon druid that just tries to play all the minions that are really cheap by playing the good stuff druid cards. So there's like Volcanic Lumberer, Volcanic Drake, Crypt Crasher, this new Phi legendary that we'll talk at the end. There are a lot of minions that Druid has access to that can get really cheap. And so since some of those are dragons, you could run Take to the Skies just to guarantee that you'll have Volcanic Drakes and Phi on your Scale of Onyxia turn. I'm really excited to build the deck that way, to be honest. Like, I am super excited for Reno Druid, but I'm also really excited for non-Reno Dragon Floops Gloop Druid. All right, so for the minions, they're all dragons. We have Splish Splash Whelp. 2 mana, 2/1. If you're holding a dragon, gain an empty mana crystal. So this is the second iteration of strictly better wild growth if you're holding a dragon. We have Breath of Dreams in wild, and now we have this, and we have Invigorate. So theoretically, a non-Highlander dragon druid could run 6 strictly better unnerved wild growths, which I think is about as many as you would want before you start considering some to cut, but pretty excited to build a deck like that. Obviously, in Reno Dragon Druid, this is good, and getting to run 3 unnerved wild growths is good in Reno Dragon Druid as well. Gonna be a nutty card for any type of Dragon Druid, just like Breath of Dreams is. Dragon Golem, 7 mana, 3/4 dragon with Taunt, Battlecry, summon a copy of this for each dragon in your hand. This is a little bit awkward because it's kind of expensive, its stats are kind of meager, so you need to have a lot of dragons in hand before you actually feel good about the mana you've spent on this, especially in wild. What's nice about it in a potential Highlander list is you can run Oldham Elise to double your dragons in hand and then play this. So you'll much more likely to actually fill up your board. I do think that this is a bit of an expensive build around, and it's not going to be one of the stronger dragons, but it's good enough that if you want to play with all the new stuff, I think you can get away with it. Then we have Spinetail Drake, 4 mana, 5/4 dragon. If you're holding a dragon, deal 5 damage to an enemy minion. I think that this is phenomenal in 2019. Just a few years back, I feel like this is just so good, but in wild, I don't think that the 5 damage goes very far. If your opponent's going tall, they're going much taller than that, and if they're going wide, this doesn't have taunt, it doesn't have rush. You're deleting your opponent's ship's cannon with excess damage, and then the other 6 minions and the swordfish go face and you lose. So I don't have a lot of faith in this in wild. It does seem probably standard good. Like, I look at this and I see a good card, but then I've played enough wild to be like, is it though? So I don't know. I think it's kind of borderline. It could end up being really good, and I'm just jaded by some of these wild metas. Then we have Desert Nest Matron, 4 mana, 3/5 dragon, taunt, battle cry. If you're holding a dragon, refresh 4 mana crystals. Another card that I think would go really good in that spend no mana to summon minions type of dragon deck. It also has extra synergy with Bran, so on 7 you can play Bran and this, and then you get all that mana back. Maybe you play another thing in the second copy of this, and you can keep the free stuff train going. Just as a card though, I think it's good. So you can play this on 4 and then still play Overgrowth or something like that. It allows you to play low tempo cards with a little bit of tempo as well. And then finally we have the legendaries. So Fi the Setting Sun, which I think is absolutely crazy and wild. 9 mana, 4/12 dragon. Rush, Lifesteal, and Taunt. Costs 1 less for each dragon you've summoned this game. So if you play Scale of Onyxia, this costs 2 because it's summoned, not played. So you can play Scale of Onyxia, clear your opponent's board, or mostly clear it, then play this, get some Lifesteal, Rush, and protect your face with a Taunt. I think this is crazy good. You can play it with Floop, you can play it with Floop's Gloop, you can play it with Zola and get a second copy. This is really easy to discount in Wild, and I expect it to be pretty good. I think that this is much better than the Highlander legendary we're about to talk about, and it kind of excites me to play a non-Highlander version of it with Volcanic Drakes and Nest Matrons to get a bunch of cheap stuff that I can tutor with that dragon spell. So yeah, I think it's going to be pretty cool. A lot of stuff to mess around with Fi. I think it's super broken, probably gets nerfed at some point. Then we have Rheastraza, 8 mana, 8/8 dragon. If your deck has no duplicates, summon the Purified Dragon Nest. The Purified Dragon Nest is an uninteractable that at the beginning of your turn, you discover a dragon and it costs 4 less. So that effect is pretty good. This is kind of an 8 mana, 8/8 do nothing, but in Druid, that's a little bit more acceptable because you have so much ramp. I think that as a Highlander payoff, this is both really cool and unique and strong and a really fun way to encourage that archetype. The problem is the Reno Hero card actually removes uninteractables. So against a Highlander deck, you're going to have to either wait to play this until after your opponent has played their Reno Hero, or you're going to have to accept that there's a high likelihood you will get no or minimal dragons off of this. But if your opponent doesn't have exactly that, or they've played it already, this is endless dragon value. It's like having the Juggernaut in Druid. So yeah, I think this is really cool. This is like the big exciting reason to run Reno Dragon Druid over just regular Dragon Druid, and it does give you a nice supplement to Dragon Queen Alexstrasza for Kazakusan, as well as just having all of these other cheap dragons, cheap good dragons. So yeah, overall I'm super excited for Druid. I think Druid has so much cool stuff to do in Wild. If you've been following my channel between like Alterac Valley and Festival of Legends, you know that I love that type of Druid deck. So yeah, huge update for all those types of things that I really like. It's kind of funny, this set went all in on dragons. There's not really a lot to do outside of that, but dragons popular. I like having a lot of new tools for a specific archetype, and some of these are very flexible outside of that as well. So really cool set. Love the Druid stuff. For the deck, we have a Highlander Dragon Druid, surprising everyone. We have all of the wild growths, so like Breath of Dreams, Invigorate, and Splish Splash Whelp. That gives you 3 2-mana ramp spells to play with. You're going to really consistently be skipping your turn 3, which is great, just like old times. Then for our win condition, we have Kazakusan or Rheastraza or Dragon Queen Alex. So you can either like ramp and tempo out your high cost cards, or you can play a bunch of dragons and then drop Kazakusan and get the fancy treasure deck to finish off your opponent. We do have Aviana Aeonar in here because we have so many high cost things, as well as Elise the Enlightened. So you'll have a lot of extra value to play with post Aviana refresh your mana crystals. It's just a matter of getting enough mana to play all these cards, which I think is going to be really easy. So having all of the 2 mana ramp cards is going to enable you to play cards like Overgrowth a lot easier. So we have Overgrowth in Widowbloom Seedsman. We play our 2 mana ramp card into our 4 mana ramp card, and then we have Nourish, Guff, and the token cards plus Floop's Glorious Goop. I think it's gonna be super easy to ramp with a deck like this. We've just kind of like hit a threshold of efficient ramp cards that we're not gonna have to worry about ramping before playing our expensive stuff. I've definitely built this on the greedier end. I don't think that it's gonna be too big of a problem considering the ramp, but I do imagine we'll probably want to scale down some of that late game stuff, at least by a bit, for whatever the final list or meta list of Reno Druid's going to be. But this is my type of deck, so I had to do it. And finally we have Paladin. So first Paladin spell is Lay Down the Law, 2 mana, wholly tradable. Set a minion's attack and health to 1, and then quick draw, deal 1 damage to it. So it's kind of like if you top decked it, it's 2 mana, destroy a minion. Conditional 2 mana, destroy a minion has historically not been that great. A lot of them are okay, like Arson Accusation is okay because you played in decks that are very likely to damage themselves on their turn. 2 mana, destroy a minion, no tech, like no requirement, is pretty good. So the closer a requirement gets to not actually mattering, the better the card becomes. This one I think is just a little bit too awkward. So what's cute about it is you draw this, and then if you didn't want to destroy anything that turn, you can trade it, which will let you draw it again later, potentially when you would actually want to remove a minion. But I think that that's kind of like in the realm of Execute. Execute was pretty mid at 2, and I think that this is like a slightly, like needing to quick draw it is a slightly more conditional scenario than a minion being damaged. So I imagine that this isn't that great. You can do things like Knight of Anointment to increase the likelihood that you'll draw this, but then I think if you're building that deck, you want to draw different holy spells with it. So I don't expect this to see a lot of play in either format, to be honest. At 1, I think it would both be better and probably fair still, although I guess it would be so efficient that it would feel terrible, right? Like you don't want your opponent to have really good efficient removal just because they top decked a card. So maybe this is just conceptually unfixable, but I could also be undervaluing it. It might be all right. Then we have Deputization Aura, which is a 3 mana holy spell. Your leftmost minion has +3 attack and lifesteal, and it lasts 3 turns. So this seems pretty good for an aggro deck. You put your Crab Rider on the left, and then it will get the Wind Fury +3 attack, lifesteal, and if that goes down, your opponent still has to deal with whatever your other minion on the field is that becomes your new leftmost minion. It is a holy spell, so it discounts Garden's Grace. You can draw it with Knight of Anointment. I think it's a good card. It's a little awkward to evaluate because your opponent has some control over what minion has this effect, but I imagine it's good enough to see some play in wild in a wild aggro deck. It also goes really well with Keeper Strength, so you play this on 3 or 4, and then either you curve into Keeper Strength and whatever minion you had makes a huge clear, or play this on 3 or 4 into your turn 5 so that you can play Righteous Protector and Keeper Strength then, or Knight of Anointment and Keeper Strength, and still have a huge clear. So I think this could be really good in an aggro wild deck. Then we have Showdown, which is a pretty interesting card. So 2 mana, both players summon 3/3/3 outlaws. Give yours Rush. So this is cool with the card we're going to discuss in a second, but also just on its own. Like say you're up against a Pirate Rogue or an Even Shaman board that's full. For 2 mana, you get the 3/3 rushers and your opponent gets nothing. So against like really fast aggro that goes wide, it becomes a one-sided effect, or lopsided effect at least, if they're at like 5 or 6 minions. But then with Prismatic Beam, this card is absolutely ridiculously bonkers. For 7 mana, deal 3 damage to all enemies. So that's their whole board and their face. Costs 1 less for each enemy minion. So in that same scenario, you just get to spend 0 mana to wipe the whole board away. And it goes really well with Showdown because if your opponent has 3 out, you can play Showdown. Now they have 6 out. The Prismatic Beam will cost 1, and it'll wipe away all the outlaws you gave to your opponent. Obviously, these 2 cards are meant to go together. Showdown I would have been much more skeptical about without Prismatic Beam, but the fact that it's kind of useful on its own and absolutely cracked with Prismatic Beam, I think that you'll probably see both of them together in every Paladin deck, to be honest. The Prismatic Beam is absolutely crazy. The exception is going to be Odd Paladin, right? Which I think would still play it. At worst, it's 0 mana burst against a big board. I guess it is a little bit awkward if your opponent isn't playing for board. So it's like only good against aggro decks for the most part. But even at like lower boards, you know, if your opponent has 3 minions out, This is still 4 mana, deal 3 damage to all enemies. That's good. Holy Cowboy, first of the minions here. 3 mana, 4/3, Battle Cry. Your next holy spell costs 2 less. Seems like a standard card. I could see this being okay in a wild deck if you had enough holy spells and you wanted to like play them for cheaper in like an aggro tempo deck, but I think we just have better options than this. The other thing is, if you discount the spell, it doesn't discount Guardian's Grace, right? It's discounted by mana spent on holy spells. If this was cost 3 less, I think that it would be super good, but the fact that it's 2 less means that you're not fully discounting the card very often. But you could play this on 3 and Hand of Adalid in the same turn, which is all right. So I'm like half talking myself into it. I'm not sure what to think about it. I could see it being pretty good or unplayable. Hi-Ho Silverwing, 2 mana, 2/1 dragon. I'm loving the cheap dragons in this set. They're a little late to activate some of the wild synergies, but I've always wanted cheaper dragons. But anyways, Hi-Ho Silverwing, Divine Shield, Death Rattle, draw a holy spell. This is really good in a Call to Arms Paladin deck, I think, because those decks really want you to play holy spells. They usually want you to run Guardian's Grace. But yeah, this is another really good thing to get off of Call to Arms. It's like getting to run a mini bot, but the mini bot gives you card advantage as well. Back in the oldest days of Call to Arms, you used to run Loot Hoarder and even Bloodmage Thalnos in your deck just because it made your Call to Arms draw you cards. And this does that while also having like a nice body on it and specifically tutors your holy spells that you want to draw. I don't know that it's any good in a Dragon Reno deck because you want your red scale to hit Nozdormu, the 4 mana 8/8 that ramps you. Anachronos is too good not to run, but otherwise you really want to have that Nozdormu consistency. And even though Hi-Ho Silverwing is pretty good, I think that Call to Arms specifically is the best synergy with this card, not really other dragons in wild anyway. Then we have Lawful Longarm, 5 mana 1/5 rush lifesteal, gain +1 attack for each card in your hand. So we have some hand Paladin cards. The thing is, Paladin is like historically weak with draw, so there are very few options to actually fill your hand and give these cards their full benefit. Really, it's just 2. So there's the Sunwell, and then there's this legendary that we're going to talk about in a second. So if you've played Sunwell, or if you've played this legendary, then your hand is really big and this might be good. So if this is like +9 attack, you get to 5 mana 10/5 rush and then heal for 10, which, you know, considering the requirement, still feels pretty fair, at least in wild. It might end up being really annoying in standard for all we know, but in wild I think it's just too slow, too conditional. Living Horizon, 10 mana 4/6 elemental, taunt, divine shield, costs 1 less for each other card in your hand. So this is like null. It'll cost 1 minimum. If your hand is absolutely full, it will cost 1. If we think about how much cards a Paladin is likely to have in hand, it's like, what, like 5? So then this will be like a 6 mana 4/6 taunt, divine shield. I feel like in almost every other class, maybe not hunter, maybe not warrior, but like in most other classes, this would be absolutely broken, but it's in one of the weakest draw classes, so you have to run these awkward legendary spells in order to activate this, and even then it isn't free. If you could audio engineer and then have it be free, or audio amplifier rather, and have it be free, but it's like so many of the stars have to align. I don't know that hand Paladin is going to be good. It's such a random class to like introduce this to, but I think it might be foreshadowing, right? Like we might see the hand Paladin archetype manifest over the next couple expansions, and it's just not that great for now. So Badlands Bandits, this is the other hand one. So 6 mana, get 8 3/2 bandits with bonus effects. Any that can't fit in your hand are summoned instead. So the bonus effects are like the same ones that come off of the party goers or whatever, all the basic keywords. This is good if your hand is full, and it's weird if your hand isn't full. So the idea is you play this on like 7 and you get to play your elemental for 1 or a null for 1 in wild, and then you have like decent minions. You know, like you don't really care about playing a 2 mana 3/2 lifesteal or a 2 mana 3/2 rush or a 2 mana 3/2 divine shield at this stage of the game, and in some cases not at all. So this really is just an activator. It becomes all right if your hand is already full. So like say you play the Sunwell on 5 and then you curve into this on 6 and all of the bandits hit the field. That's not bad. You get a couple rushers, maybe a couple taunts, couple life steals, maybe a Wind Fury, and like if it sticks you get to buff it next turn and deal a bunch of damage. Overall, I think it's like a super awkward card. I don't expect it to see play in Wild unless it gets heavy support in the subsequent sets. Then we have Spirit of the Badlands, 3 mana, 3/4, Undead Beast. If your deck has no duplicates, get a permanent Mirage. So the Mirage, basically a Shifter Xeris for your own deck. It becomes a different minion in your deck every turn. And what's cool about it is the Mirage doesn't go away. You play this and it still persists in your hand to find you a new minion later on. So it's basically infinite value as long as your deck isn't empty. Pretty cool card. I think it gives Paladins some nice gas. You know, we talked about how it doesn't have a lot of draw, so it runs out of cards pretty quickly if you're playing a like a Highlander Paladin or something like that. Obviously this only goes into Highlander, but like slower Paladins tend to run out of gas is what I'm saying. So this somewhat fixes that, and it's kind of cool. You get extra Lothebs, you get extra Renos, or you get extra whatever. I do think that this is going to be pretty good in Standard. In Wilds, the matches that you would win with this type of value, you know, they fluctuate to how frequent they are. Like if it's a Reno Priest heavy meta, I imagine that this is really good, and then you'll just uninstall when your opponent Theatars your Mirage away from you. But in a Miracle Rogue Celestial Alignment meta, this is going to be unplayable. Like even if you somehow find a niche for Reno Paladin, you probably wouldn't even want to include this card at all. So it's really meta dependent. It could be really good or it could be pretty mid, but it's a really exciting card. And I think, you know, I'm not usually one of the people that gets excited about Reno Paladin, but just this set overall I think has given Reno Paladin a lot that I want to play with. So that was all the Paladin stuff. Of the 3, I'm like the least excited for this one, but at least the Highlander elements of it. The Prismatic Beam, I am super stoked to work with. I think that there's a lot of cool stuff to do there. I'm a big fan of Blue Eyes White Dragon, so the Hio Silver card is a card that I'm really excited to work with. I'd love to build a Call to Arms Paladin, test that out. So overall, like this set is just really cool, at least the Highlander side of it. The Highlander classes, obviously I really like that, but separate from Highlander, they got a bunch of tools that I think are really fun, and pretty excited to see what I can do with them. Reno Paladin right now is something that some players are having success with, and that's because it has acquired so many clears at this point that it's really good into aggro. Finding a way to end the game against not aggro is the big challenge. You see a lot of the Thaddeus Holy Maki roll, Adis Darkbane Wombo combo to end games that are like, you know, a lot has to come together before that's good. It's really cute. You know, I'll probably play with it at some point this coming expansion, but what I wanted was to focus primarily on beating aggro and then just leaning on the Mirage to give you the value to beat slower decks. I also wanted to not build 2 Kazakhstan decks for this video. So while I was struggling to come up with like how I wanted my late game to go, I was leaning towards Kazakhstan, and I like, unironically, I think it's one of the better options as far as like Paladin closers, but I don't think you necessarily need a closer with this deck anymore because the Mirage gives you infinite value. So what we have here as like the main win condition is Bran, Astalor, as well as audio amplifier in the ETC. So if things go late enough, most of the time you don't want to choose audio amplifier out of this deck because you're up against aggro, in which case your ETC produces Prismatic Beam and becomes a Prison Breaker. Like the Prison Breaker that recently got nerfed, you know, like Prismatic Beam in Highlander Paladin against aggro just gets to do that without having to have played 5 spells. So I think that that's pretty cool. That's the main purpose. You either Prismatic Beam or you draw with the ETC, but later on in the game, if you're up against like a Reno Priest or something like that, instead you choose Audio Amplifier, which will raise your mana cap to 11 so you can play Bran and stage 3 of Astalor in the same turn. That gives you access to a strong closer, but it doesn't have to go that route. You can just use the Mirage to continually discover good minions from your deck, like Anachronos or Amidus or Lotheb, over and over and over again. And even if you're not branding the Astalor, you can still find Astalor a few times with your Mirage. And if the minions in your hand are ones that you want to Mirage, you can Finley. You just have to do it before you actually play your Mirage, so you don't put the Mirage on the bottom of the deck. So yeah, this is just a pile of clears, some decent minions. Again, kind of a good stuff Paladin, I think the ETC ends up being really strong. Even if you take out the audio engineer and put something else for your value-based ETC slot, just the fact that ETC can discover Prismatic Beam makes it a much higher quality card in the Reno Paladin shell. This has some like sweet silly technology as of Caverns of Time. So we have Timeline Accelerator to draw a mech and discount it by 2. And in this list I just have the Leviathan. So you play Timeline Accelerator, you draw the Leviathan, and the Leviathan will cost 5. It's much better. But I have seen some people discussing the Curator. Spirit of the Badlands is a beast. You can play the Curator and then you'll draw Finley and Nosdorm with the Timeless or Anachronos and also Spirit of the Badlands. The Timeline Accelerator, drawing and discounting the Curator to draw those 3 would be cute. It's not in this list because I think that's something that I have to experiment with to get a sense of it, but I do think that at least the Timeline Accelerator Leviathan high roll is worth including. So that wraps up the last of the Highlander classes. I believe there are only 5, so we covered Priest and Shaman in a previous video, and this was the last of those. I still have 4 classes to go. They all have Excavate. I'm going to work on that video tomorrow. I hope you had fun walking through the remaining Highlander classes with me. Let me know in the comments if any of these lists spoke to you, if you got any ideas, what you thought of these cards. Remember to like and subscribe to support the channel, and thank you so much for watching.